Hello, everyone, and welcome to VR Download. I'm Ian Hamilton, broadcasting from New York, joined by my colleague David Heaney from London. We're here in virtual reality using headsets to broadcast from a studio made in Unity by my co host here. I'm using a Quest Pro with face and eye tracking to express myself to a live audience on YouTube, while David joins, I believe, on a Quest 2 without those extra features. We've got a big show this week, and it is going to be one of the biggest months in VR history. So we are very excited to be doing this with you. And make sure to let us know if you have any questions, as we can see your comments down there in the corner. And maybe at the end of the show, I'll do another camera test. I've got some advancements since last week. If anybody is curious to see, let us know when we wrap up the show that you're looking for it. David, what are we looking for today?
Hello, everyone. Apologies we didn't have a show on Tuesday. I was off, and I wanted to be here to talk about some of that big news, including the Quest Pro 2 report. It is absolutely roasting here in England, and for any Americans unaware, we don't have air conditioning. I think almost no one, it's definitely less than 1% of homes would have air conditioning here. So apologies if I stop making sense during this, as the heat of the headset makes my brain no longer work. But today we're going to talk about the Magic Leap 1 AR headsets that will cease to function after 2024. So that's a device that will essentially get bricked after that time. We're going to talk about my hands-on report with Flamera, which was Meta's prototype of reprojection free real-world pass-through. We'll talk about the report that Apple is testing new OLED microdisplay suppliers for future vision headsets, including non-pro vision headsets. And finally, we will talk about the arguably the biggest news of the week, that major report that Meta may be partnering with LG for a Quest Pro successor to release in 2025.
So I'm seeing in our comments a couple of people saying that our comments our volume is low. I could try to fix that, or they can turn up their volume this week. If I fix that, it's going to take a few minutes, I think, of messing with my setup. I do have a solution coming for that hopefully next week. But yeah, are you still there? All right.
Yeah, I'm still here.
What just happened? It just refreshed right in front of me. All right. Yeah. Jason is saying we sound fine, so let's just go with it. Let's get into that first subject. What do you think of a device that bricks itself over time? And like as awful as this is, I tried to boot up a Quest or an Oculus Go, and it was not an easy process to, even though like Meta took that extraordinary effort to put out a software version that you could be promised to be able to open up a Oculus Go decades from now and still, theoretically operate that device, but without a controller, which was necessary to kind of like interact with the thing, it was still effectively a pretty useless endeavor for me. Uh, how is this different? And
Yeah, I think that is important to note that in this industry so far, these standalone devices do not have the kind of longevity that you might see in more mature hardware device sectors. But this appears to be a full brick. So the email they sent out to owners was that on December 31st, 2024, cloud services for Magic Leap 1 will no longer be available. Core functionality will reach end of life, and the Magic Leap 1 device and apps will cease to function. Not that you can't download new apps, not that you can't use their store, the device will cease to function. And according to a former Magic Leap senior manager on X, Steve Lucas, this could be because the device is hard coded to run a cloud security check every 6 months. And if that cloud security check fails, the device seemingly bricks itself. This is a bizarre decision. As you did mention, the Oculus Go and Oculus Quest are technically end of life devices, but you can still use them. You can't download new apps on Go, for example, and there are many, many limitations as to the online services of Quest, but you can still use those devices with sideloaded content. You can use them with SideQuest. You can use them with the content that you already had purchased and installed. Obviously, it's not ideal that those devices didn't last that long, but in general, this is a very fast moving and early industry where technology is going to be uh, obsolete a lot quicker than if you buy a phone or a laptop. This is much more akin to the situation in the late 80s or early 90s where the devices and operating systems were obsoleted within a couple of years, whereas nowadays you can buy a phone 5 or 10 years ago and it still at least will function.
Yeah, it's a huge bummer to see these devices kind of just come literally useless. Like you can't even show someone.
Yeah, I think Ian's just having some connection issues there. Uh, so I'll just have some of the comments here. George Jorgensen saying that Magic Leap has in the past been doing some sketchy things, and yes, that is true. This device was marketed in a somewhat misleading way, at least at the start. They did kind of bring in a lot of investment while not being very clear to the public exactly what they were building. And let's actually talk about this device a bit just while we wait for Ian to return. This was very much so hyped up as going to be the future of computing. The problem was that obviously it arrived at a $2,300 price point and with a very limited field of view. And that is still even today. This headset launched in 2018. Still today, transparent AR displays just cannot reach the field of view that opaque displays like VR headsets can. And here's a visualization here of the field of view of Magic Leap 1 compared to a Quest Pro. And then on the outside, you can see what the human eye's field of view is. And so some people complain uh, even about the field of view of VR and now mixed reality headsets. But if you're to use one of these headsets like HoloLens or Magic Leap, you're not seeing these virtual objects all around you. You're seeing them in a little postcard size field of view in front of you. And that's why none of them, even even though you can now charge thousands of dollars for a VR headset, we see Apple Vision Pro coming at $3,500. It's because they can deliver an experience that in some way justifies it. But no matter what the price of these headsets are, it was never going to be the experience people wanted while you're still confined to this little postcard like view. But what we are going to see in the next 6 months and years is headsets that actually do deliver on the vision of Magic Leap 1 of augmented reality in your home, but not through transparent optics, through high resolution cameras in the front. And that's obviously Quest 3 and Apple Vision Pro and potentially Samsung's headset with Google.
So it's feeling like my Quest Pro is having Wi-Fi connection issues. It actually said Wi-Fi stopped working for a second, so I restarted real quick, and we'll see if it fixes it. There still seems to be some lag on your end. I want to throw out there, there was an experience I tried on the original Magic Leap One. It was Dr. G's. I'm not even going to to say the full name of that character that was there. But it was Dr. G's Robot Adventure was basically what it was. And it was a preview shown at LeapCon on the headset. And it allowed me to get a sense of the field of view of this thing. And, you know, the audience can't see the space we've got here, but we've got walls on either end of this room. I would say any normal, good sized room that you would have in a house, it could realistically make a portal, a door-sized portal, or even larger, maybe floor to ceiling on the other side of the wall. And that would be a really believable way of having content come into your room if you could tear out a hole in the wall or take over an entire wall or even get all the way to the top and the bottom. And it was a cool introduction to mixed reality. I think given the way Magic the Biz like changed hands and had to close down projects and funded so many ideas, there's a fully wrapped, finished mixed reality project there that lived and died on Magic Leap hardware, is I guess where I'm going with this. There were other experimental things that I think lived on in other ways. Uh, but that Dr. G's experience is lost to history, essentially. Why what can we do? Is there anything that can be done? Can pressure be done? Is anyone watching out there know the people involved to make that project work on modern mixed reality headsets? Because it can, right? There's no reason why, other than an investment of porting manpower, to get content that ran on this device running on a modern day system.
Yeah, that is the real shame of this situation. There were maybe 20,000 of these things sold in their entire lifespan, and that's being generous. But what the shame is that there was a significant investment put into that content. And as you say, there was some incredible content because this was the first time that developers could build these kind of experiences for a consumer audience. HoloLens 2 was pretty much entirely aimed towards enterprise. And even the original HoloLens, while Microsoft did demo some kind of Minecraft experiences and some consumer things, all of their marketing and real focus was in enterprise. And that's where Magic Leap is today. You know, they no longer care about that consumer software because Magic Leap 2 is entirely focused around enterprise, just as they pivoted Magic Leap 1 towards enterprise, around less than 18 months after launch when they realized that this consumer market just wasn't there yet. So yeah, hopefully now that we do have headsets like Quest 3 on the horizon, like Vision Pro, that could run these experiences, we'll see that happen because Quest 2 and Quest Pro are missing some of the functionality that a lot of these apps relied on in terms of being able to mesh out your room. A lot of these Magic Leap apps relied on the fact that this headset, for all of its flaws, had pretty excellent scene understanding. It could generate a 3D mesh of your room. It has depth sensing hardware on it. This thing, from a capture perspective, is better than anything that you can pretty much buy on the consumer market today. But that is obviously going to change when we see depth sensors arrive in Quest 3 and Apple Vision Pro. So hopefully Meta or Apple or someone is able to get this to happen, but it may just be an issue of licensing. It may be that the teams that built the content for this are just no longer still there, that that institutional knowledge is just passed on.
Yeah, Vexner asking a $20 question here, and it is a $20 question, so I appreciate the donation, but it's a big question in our comments, and it's a deep one that's got like multiple angles for consideration. So Vexner asks, with features showcased on monthly now, and that's true. Like there's new features shown on a regular basis for VR devices. And the examples here are full body tracking, eye, face, hand tracking. We've also seen examples like higher field of view, pass through, different various forms of pass through. That's something we'll get to later in the show. And then, of course, various types of haptics. With all of that, has there been any progress with the Kronos group or standardization in any way for syncing all of this data across different VR software and hardware? You went to SIGGRAPH. Did you get anything like, SIGGRAPH is the place ultimately, I think, where you would have those conversations or understand where the industry is at really fundamental layers. Did you get any insight into this? Do you have any thoughts on this, David Heaney?
Yeah, as you said, it's a massive question and it kind of covers a lot of different things. It would almost be an entire show in itself to discuss this. But in general, we are seeing more and more companies adopt OpenXR, with the notable exception of Apple. We're seeing companies, instead of using their proprietary APIs and SDKs, routing everything through an OpenXR extension. We're now at the point where if you're a developer, the ability to develop an Android VR app that runs on Quest and Pico and Vive XR Elite is getting more and more practical every day. What we did actually see, interestingly, at SIGGRAPH and what was announced by NVIDIA, was more companies coming on to the USDZ standard, but that's actually not being done by Kronos. Kronos have their own 3D standard, which is GLTF. So ironically, there's kind of I wouldn't call that a step forward, maybe a step sideways or arguably backwards, because we have this open industry group proposing GLTF. We had some companies adopt it. Meta used it in the Rift Home, for example, for 3D objects. There's a lot of other companies using it, but now we have these other companies standardizing around this Apple Pixar format. So that's actually kind of a new format war that's going to emerge in a way, not actually a step forward.
Yeah, it is a really interesting question, and I think about it in context of things like big screen, with things like getting 3D models into the studio, with things like supporting multiple avatar systems. We, I've been messing around with your studio recently, David. He basically hacking his studio with various tools in OBS to see what kind of effects I could get out of the studio. And it's interesting to think about how open all the underlying stuff is when I start hacking his studio using a PC. intermediary or using even multiple PCs in between. But I can throw up a screen up here, an HDMI input of any kind if I really want, and we can watch that live in this studio. That's coming very close to the functionality that Big Screen is trying to do over on its system, where you can go into Big Screen, you can go into various places in VR chat and find just streaming content that is of questionable IP ownership, but it's still getting broadcast out there to multiple people in multiple ways. And we could hypothetically have on the screen a 2D window into VR chat, into Rec Room, into Horizon Worlds, and we could have a conversation over this 2D plane in between us, right? Where like we've got a live streaming video here, we've got all this technical underlying broadcast equipment that would be required to pull us off. But we would have to have a conversation from here in the studio that David Heaney built across a 2D screen, a virtual 2D screen, into VR chat. And there's no way for us to directly interact between these worlds. And it bothers me to think that we might have that be the reality for a very, very, very long time, where there is no interoperability between these systems, and we can't have Ready Player Me avatars like you've promised and said. When we get to it, we'll get to it, like on Ready Player Me. But it's like I want it right now, and I know that that's like the audience feeling out there regarding these types of features precisely. Like they wanted this interoperability yesterday, and it takes forever to get there.
Yeah, I think what you're describing there in terms of being able to overlay one game or app into another is just something completely outside how current software works on any operating system whatsoever. It would be a completely different paradigm, and that's something that maybe there are stealth teams out there working on. But for now, you know, on all these non-Apple headsets, these are just Android operating systems running APKs that are all siloed from each other. You have WebXR, which is web standards, and that's a little bit more interoperable. But even then, all of the kind of cross-site origin restrictions that are in modern web browsers mean you can't even do interoperability between websites anymore. You can't embed one website into another for the security risks that that entails. And the idea that you could do some of the things you're describing, it's certainly interesting, but it's just not something that any operating system or uh, software architecture or game engine, more importantly, because at the end of the day, all of these experiences are running from Unity or Unreal, were just remotely supports. It's something that has only been even brought up in modern culture through some of the kind of crypto stuff, and we'll not touch on the validity of that. But they always kind of promise this idea of bringing an item you purchased in one game into another. But even then, all they ever proposed there was the way of accounting for that using a blockchain. There was never any discussion of how that would technically even work. The closest thing you can maybe talk about is some of the ways that the kind of high level editors that are being built into some gaming platforms now, like Fortnite's Unreal Engine creation tools and things like Roblox are kind of maybe an example of that. But yeah, having that happen across actual independently compiled binaries is just it's just not something that is part of the current software architecture at all.
Yeah, like an example. So I think I can't remember if I brought this up previously on the show, but what was it? Verizon had funded or worked with the Met Museum of New York, Metropolitan Museum, um, and they had mapped out the museum, had scanned a number of the artworks, and then you could go in there with your phone and try to line up your phone at just the right spot to essentially scan the artwork, and then you would get a code that you would have to copy and paste into the Roblox app in order to redeem an equivalent skin for your avatar in Roblox. It's like it boggles my mind that we're back to like the mentality of the early 2000s when you would buy a DVD and get a code for the digital edition of your content, and like that's how you get physical objects in virtual reality. um i'm I'm also testing the Walkabout Mini Golf Hello Real golf club, and you just stick the controller you've got right there, right in the end of the club. You've got it here, and it's a $60 club, which is just the price of a full priced game. You could attach a code to that and release the game that way on multiple platforms. Like we've harped on this thing for years, this interoperability thing, because we're at the cusp of another major inflection point of adoption, and there is the sense that the companies that we've been talking about for years, David, are actually getting ready to make big changes in their product lines and their technologies that they're supporting, right? Like we did hear that vague rumor, it popped up, we haven't reported on it, right? About PlayStation supporting PSVR 2, right? The thing that I've been begging for, but we've had no technical basis to report on, was rumored out there for like the another time. That's we've been hinting things like that might happen, and it seems ridiculous that they don't happen more often with a thing like OpenXR. But even like OpenXR is only the beginning of kind of like true interoperability. We can take things from our wallet and hand them from one person to another, no matter where we are.
Yeah, I think the problem here is there's just this word has become so vague of interoperability. It means so many different things, and some of them are technically possible, and some of them are just not. And there's no clear definition. And at the end of the day, what these companies are going to do is they're going to respond to consumer desires, and unless consumers are asking for it, it's just not going to happen. And to develop the kind of everywhere anything level of interoperability you're kind of alluding to there would require an effort on the scale of the development of the original web standards, except significantly more technically complicated. And I don't think there are a few companies that are just never going to join in there. Apple, for example, Apple aren't even going to join OpenXR. So any interoperability that the industry builds outside of Apple will only exist within all those other headsets, and developers will just ignore it for when they're building for Vision.
Yeah, I hate those. I hate all these comments about what Apple is going to do or not going to do. We're careful with our language on our reporting of Apple because they announced the product so long before actually releasing it. It is really hard to say what the final feature set will be and what updates might be in software OS 2.0 or 3.0.
Well, sure, but what they did make very clear was the development and software architecture of this system. That is kind of the whole point of announcing this at WWDC. In a way, the fact that this was announced to consumers was a sidestep. What Apple really cared about there was generating excitement among developers and getting developers to understand what it means to port their existing 2D apps to this new platform and what it means to start building spatial apps and think about this spatially. That's why they're having these developer labs. That's why they've put out the Vision OS simulator and already made this available in Xcode. And in augmented reality mode, this thing can't even take raw output from a game engine. Game engines have to convert all their materials, and everything has to be rendered through Apple's own reality kit system, and that will actually open up some novel possibilities for Apple to Apple interoperability over time and what you can do in any software. You may be able to see kind of always on co-location for without the developers having to really build that explicitly into applications, for example. You might see some cross device usage there, but it's not going to have any benefit when you come to these other Apple devices that don't use Metal, that don't use Reality Kit, that don't use AR Kit, and don't support any of the massive end-to-end software stack that Apple has built up for itself and only itself.
Mm, lots of things to think about there. Yeah, I don't want to go off on the M word and just really just go off on all the different things that that can mean, and what it means for the what it means for interoperability. Uh, but there's you can see it in Horizon Worlds as Meta sort of cuts apart pieces of that platform meant for different sort of audiences, right? They built like a tag that you can attach to all of the worlds to uh, let the entire community, let the entire platform know that only adults are allowed in that space. They obviously back that with, I think, the Facebook real identity policy. I don't know if that is still in place, but because they've changed so many different things. Um, And then, of course, you've got devices that run on like one single platform running on every single device in front of you. Sounds like a dream come true. It's what we see Rec Room closing in on so closely, VR Chat closing in on, um, and Horizon Worlds is almost there, but nobody has tested it since it's been like geo fenced, age fenced, account fenced. It's they haven't let anyone really try Horizon Worlds as they've been trying to get their act together. But do one of these platforms then become the basis for like uh getting your stuff in other things? Because that's what Roblox was for my kid. He got excited for he was playing in Roblox on his device and saw that my avatar changed in his friends list. I was like, what were you doing? And that's, I don't know, that's how like Fortnite works in some ways. We're really close.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we're going to see these siloed ecosystems build out onto many devices, build out into real world use cases. But at the end of the day, these are still all just siloed applications. There is no interoperability between Roblox and Fortnite. There is no interoperability between Horizon Worlds and Rec Room, and there's no interoperability between Rec Room and VR Chat. These are not. People have this idea. Let's just use the M word. Some people argue that there is no such thing as multiple metaverses. There can only be one metaverse. Ideologically, sure, maybe, but there is no such concept today. No such thing exists, and no one has actually proposed a real technical architecture beyond perhaps WebXR for it to exist. Right now, from a practical perspective, metaverses are siloed digital universes that do not talk to each other in any way. You pick one, they allow you to create your own worlds, your own content, but those worlds live within that application and you cannot port them out of it. And there's no interoperability of any kind in sight, whether it be for digital owned items or for creations. And there's no incentive for any of these companies to even do so yet.
Yeah, so go ahead and cut that clip out and send that to anyone when they start bringing up the M word. I wasn't going to get into the M word, and David Heaney decided to just disassemble it for all of you out there. Send that clip out to everyone who brings that up and tell them to shut the fuck up. Oh,
I mean,
do
yeah.
you know I
Again,
cuss?
I think the I think the analogy again should be made to the only time that the technology industry has really come together to build something comparable, and it was the World Wide Web and the W3C and all the standards that were built there, so that any browser can talk to any web server and use all of an entire layer of open standards across the entire everything you're doing from the end content delivery to the networking that is built on the open TCP internet standards. If you were to build something on top of that, maybe you can build a metaverse. Then but this again, the way it's rendered, it would have to be completely different to today. You would have to have metaverse browsers that are essentially game engines but aren't designed to use pre-compiled applications. They're designed to dynamically pull in code and content and run it in a way that is simultaneously lower level than engines but higher level than engines but lower level than something like a web browser. There's some people will still argue again that WebXR will eventually be that, but for now, it's just not something that is ready to be there. You don't have games like Fortnite in WebXR for very good reasons.
Mm. Well, we've gotten entirely derailed by that $20 Vexner question. Thank you so much for the donation. Thank you so much for the question. It was a very good question, very interesting one that we will have to come back to week in and week out. Um, I'd be curious. I'm just going to ask this question for our audience. Would you rather see us put out uh, news as quickly as we can, or keep a more regular schedule for our broadcasting? I guess we've got a captive audience here. They can't speak for our readers, but we picked this random time on a Thursday, and it is actually a sign. I think it's interesting. We've been jumping around now over these last couple of weeks on our broadcast times and even over the summer, right? Because we've been traveling physically in the real world for the first time in years, since COVID, and we've been seeing HMDs left and right. I saw Apple Vision Pro. You went to SIGGRAPH and saw uh, a lineup of new HMDs with new technologies, and it's like a sign that people actually have research that they're ready to show, and not just research, real products. It's, when every time you see a VR is dead article, you have to remember that there is a constant supply of new people doing frontier work in these technologies in VR and AR, and it's one of the reasons we focus so much on it. And one of the examples of what you saw is this bug-like thing. If you want to like boil it down and be over reductive, it looks like a bug on your face. And we'll show the image later. It's one of the coolest HMD images of you in a headset I've ever seen. Um, but what it actually does is significantly cooler than just its appearance, right?
Yeah, and I think our audience here are being clear that they want us to continue what we were doing in the past few weeks, which was to stream on Tuesday at our regular time. And I think that is our plan. Again, as I mentioned at the start, the only reason we missed it this week was I was off. But, we're going to be streaming again next Tuesday, and that is our plan to continue to stream on Tuesdays at our regular time, with the rare exception of when we're off. But yeah, to talk about this is called Flamera. If you go to uploadvr.com and scroll down a little bit, you can find it, or just search for Flamera. This was the other headset that I tried at SIGGRAPH this year. And if you watch a few weeks ago, we discussed the first headset I tried, which was that Butterscotch varifocal, which was retinal varifocal. This one was a reprojection free pass through. So anyone that's used a Quest 2 or a Quest Pro today will understand that the current method of real world pass through of reprojecting the view from cameras on the front of the headset is less than ideal. It results in distortion, it results in double motion on objects. There are kind of color fringing issues. We really hope that Quest 3 is going to improve on that, and that's something we're going to be carefully looking at in our review. But this headset takes a completely different approach. And what it does instead is use an array of these 53 smaller lenses with a fixed aperture to capture the view from each direction rather than trying to capture an omnidirectional view. These two cameras at the top of the headset are not actually used in the Flamera system. They are used as a demo system so that you can side by side see what the Rift S and Quest 2 pass through looks like. That's when they put you in this headset, you originally see the black and white distorted view, and then they switch it to this system that shows you reprojection free pass through. Now, as you will read in my article, the major problem here was that the display system used here in Flamera was pretty terrible. It was actually very terrible. It was a 60 hertz display system with full persistence that had washed out colors. And the reason they picked it was to make the headset as thin as possible so that they could bring these lenses as close as possible to your eye so that the virtual image looks like it's coming exactly from where your eyes are. The problem was that meant that while I could see an image with no distortion, there was none of the double imaging, there was none of the warping that you see in current pass-through headsets. The actual visual experience was terrible. The latency was inherently high, despite this capture system having almost no latency. And so I really hope next year, when I go to SIGGRAPH again, hopefully, that Meta will show this with a more suitable display system, because this was a remarkably impressive capture system, but it was being shown with a really, really poor display system. And one of the things they could possibly do that I point out in the article is use those hollow cake lenses that they showed off last year in research, which were even thinner headset designs than pass-through lenses, enabled even thinner designs than pancake lenses.
Hmm. What do you see this being on a commercial path? Do you think the research here will be useful in future pass through, other than abstract? Like, I mean, are we going to get anything that looks like this weird bug-like display? Like, it is a cool idea, and I like this idea of being able to kind of see with my actual eyes. Like, again, I just want to recap for everyone, because you went over it so closely. It is essentially like having two sets of eyes, right? You've got one set of eyes that are up here, and then it's getting computer vision corrected for your actual eye position, right?
No, No. To be clear, these cameras are only used to demo what Quest and 2 and Rift S looks like. The whole point of this is that it doesn't use many computer vision algorithms. This
Well,
uses a very, very simple algorithm that does almost no reprojection
how
whatsoever.
can you how can you simulate what the Quest 2 does from up there, from that position? Like that's what the gap I'm trying to close here, because the Quest 2 cameras are right there, right there, right there, and right there, right?
Yeah, it only really uses 2 of them on Quest 2. I guess yes, you do have to do more reprojection from up there, but it's still a pretty good estimation. But again, that wasn't the point of the demo. The point of that was just to show people who had never tried a Quest 2 or Rift S what
Okay.
current day
So
pass
it's an
through looks like.
analog for what the Quest for just a standard computer
Yeah.
vision
Yeah, so say
system.
no,
Okay, got
someone's
it.
never tried that before. They say this is what a current headset looks like, and then to be clear, in the demo, these cameras are not used at all. These cameras on the top, they turn off, and then the actual demo starts.
Okay, and then you're basically looking through an image provided by these little itty bitty lenslets. Is that what they're called?
Yeah, well, they're just individual lenses, but there's one large sensor in behind them, and they're capturing each of these is capturing the view from each perspective, and then all of these little circles are just stitched together. That image stitching is significantly less computationally expensive than reprojection. It is a very, very, very low overhead algorithm at that point because you don't need to when you're actually getting the correct view for each angle.
Yeah. So the hard thing that I guess I come back to with these is we watched these headsets come at us for years, right? We saw Half Dome 1, 2, 3, the entire series of them going from mechanical to electronic varifocal systems. And that was one line of research that the meta research teams have been under. But manufacturing and actually getting these into consumer devices has been something Meta has been repeatedly unwilling to actually do. What is that going to change now that we live in a world where things like Vision Pro are actually shipping?
Yeah, so what this team, the display systems research team at Meta, will constantly reiterate is that their primary goal isn't to develop something that can go into a near term headset. The other headset I tried, Butterscotch Varifocal, they've even freely admitted that the approach it takes is in no way designed to at all be practical. What it was designed to do is to research the feeling of varifocal and retinal together. And what this headset is designed to do in a way is to research the feeling of reprojection free pass through. Now, this headset does also show off an approach that could one day technically be used for that. But again, they stress that this may never be used in products. And it's very important to also realize that Meta's product teams and their research teams are very separate. And often they never speak, they never cooperate. There are some tasks for which there is some cooperation, such as the Quest Pro lenses. Meta claims went through research and then came down through into the product teams. But for the most part, these are entirely separate people in entirely separate buildings that never speak. And these people had no, input in Quest 3 or Quest Pro. They are out here figuring out what are going to be the technologies that are needed and important in 10 or 15 or 20 years' time, not what's actually happening soon. As to whether this is practical, very large image sensor at the back here would be cost prohibitive for a headset, but they have said that you could use lots of small image sensors. What I expect to see, uh, maybe eventually, if this something like this does come to market, is a hybrid approach where they do a little bit of reprojection with a lot fewer lenses, but then they have more than one perspective rather than just the cameras. The other important
Mm.
thing I would note is that this doesn't actually need to be external. You can have a polarized display over it so that it can still capture light, but you can show a external display, the Apple Vision Pro approach of reverse pass-through, which as regular readers and viewers will know, Meta actually showed off in their own research a few years ago.
Yeah, so there were a couple
Reverse
interesting
pass-through.
comments here. Guy Godin, the creator of Virtual Desktop, popping up in our comments saying that Meta's goal is to, quote, file patents to stifle competition. It's an interesting view of the overall research effort there. Mark Zuckerberg in the past, I think, has used the words like strengthening muscles to describe what the manufacturing sort of build up effort was to build headsets, was they were trying to, yeah, do things uh, that they couldn't before was the way it's been worded in the past. But I think Guy Godin's way of thinking about that is certainly worth considering at least.
Yeah, it's as Lil Scampy says in the comments, it is a very cynical view. You know, I don't think it's anything unique to Meta, though. We see a lot of these big companies have these research divisions that look at these very far out things, and maybe 1 or 2% of it actually then eventually comes in products. Microsoft was the first of the big tech companies to do this. Microsoft research has been a thing for a very long time. Before then, you had kind of other research initiatives. Bell Labs, for example, they had a remarkably high percentage of their technologies that eventually went into products. Xerox PARC developed a lot of the fundamental technologies of desktop computers, but Xerox was kind of too short-sighted to ever make use of it. And other companies like Apple and Microsoft came in and took those ideas and actually brought them to the world. But yeah, on screen now you'll see Meta's research they showed off years before Vision Pro was released of their own reverse pass-throughs. So you can imagine eventually a headset that has these outwards displays, and underneath it you have all of those lenses that make up the Flamera prototype as well. So it'll be fascinating to see what eventually is productized, but we know that when Meta did show off some of these technologies last year, reverse pass-through and the hollow cake lenses I referred to earlier, Mark Zuckerberg said that if any of this was going to come to market, it would be well into the second half of the decade. So again, just do not expect any of this anytime soon. We're getting quite a few people asking if you can turn the volume up. Ian, I'm not sure if it's the capture volume on your PC in the
Yeah, I think
bottom right.
it's just going to take me a second. Let's see if this works. I'm going to go back to the starting soon screen while I mess with this and see if this can be managed. Give me maybe 4 minutes. We'll be right back. subscribe. That is good advice. Thank you for that. We'll find out here. We're looking for your comments to let us know if we're actually live. That's what is that? That it's a little bit existential, isn't it? We need to know if other people are out there so that we know if we exist. I I don't know. I'm not seeing
Yeah,
any
we are live.
comments.
We are live.
All right. Uh, wow. So yeah, nice and loud all of a sudden, and we have switched our broadcasting in a live broadcast from the United States to England. That is a
Yeah,
cool
I'm
power.
streaming on my PC now, so hopefully that should work.
That's a cool superpower. That we can switch midstream to another broadcast PC on another continent. Love that. That's cool. All right. Where do you want to pick up? Are you ready to talk about Apple yet?
Yeah, let's talk about Apple. I don't think there's anything other to say on Flamera, other than just remind people that Meta's research division is separate than their product team, and don't expect the research stuff to arrive in headsets anytime soon.
Yeah, so Apple is reportedly testing new OLED microdisplay suppliers for future vision headsets. Now, we have a short history sort of on this show talking about the many, many, many trials and tribulations of sort of getting to this moment of just getting a Vision Pro device out into market, and we are not there yet, right? This device isn't actually on any consumer's heads at this moment. Won't be till sometime next year, and we're hearing a lot of things suggesting that it's unfinished in various ways. And Apple is the most well-funded team on the planet, I guess, at this point to kind of execute. But that doesn't mean they can't screw up. So, what is the significance of this bit of news, David Heaney?
Yeah, so the Vision Pro that's arriving next year is reportedly very supply constrained, with Apple only able to produce reportedly around less than 500,000 units in the first year. And a big reason for that, as well as its $3,500 starting price, is its use of these ultra high resolution micro displays from Sony. And Sony is reportedly having yield issues and issues with actually scaling up the production of OLED micro displays. So the report that's come out this week suggests that Apple is now testing micro displays from two new suppliers, Chinese suppliers, BOE and Sia. BOE is actually a company that supplies panels to Meta for its headset, obviously LCD panels in all of the kind of current headsets. And they have also kind of supplied some of the LCD panels for other VR headsets, but they are obviously trying to get into the OLED microdisplay game themselves, and they're one of the two companies that Apple's testing. The other is Sia Technologies, and they are reportedly the supplier for Big Screen Beyond. That's using a 2.5K display, micro display though, whereas Apple Vision Pro is kind of around 3.5K. So it's a lot harder to increase that density while still having high enough yield for scale. But if these two companies do pass Apple's stringent quality checks, then they're going to be able to bring in a lot more micro displays. And this report from the information suggests that Apple is going to be able to use that to bring down the price of the successor to Vision Pro, presumably will be called Vision Pro 2, as well as introduce a lower end product line, a non pro vision that's been reported for a while. And the reports of it from the likes of Bloomberg's Mark Gurman and from The Information, which are two sources that revealed a lot of information about Vision Pro before its launch, suggest that that headset probably won't arrive until 2026. But that Apple Vision could be priced somewhere around the same as an iPhone. We could see a headset from Apple in 3 years' time that arrives at, say, 1,200 or 1,500 or somewhere around that, while the Vision Pro line is at maybe 2,500, 3,000. So over time, Apple can produce more headsets, bring prices down, and really scale this new business from just being a thing for a couple of 100,000 super enthusiasts to maybe a multi-million and eventually dozens of million unit a year.
Yeah, we've obviously, yeah, people are really appreciating the change to the new audio. Apologize for that. Make sure that won't happen again. Make sure our audio levels are loud by next week. I think that'll be easy. Um, the the idea of price being kind of all over the board is difficult when we're talking specifically about the optics and the display system. Um, it's I when I look at Vision Pro and that the fact that Apple sort of applied that Pro label to it right out of the gate, uh, there's there's certain implications, right? There's the assumption that they're going to go with a non-Pro device at some point, and what I struggle with is the idea that they could go several years. Maybe they'll do it next year, hopefully, but that they could go a couple of years before actually releasing a product that is less expensive and doesn't like have the same at least the same optics. Like every single iPhone Apple has released successively has had a better camera than the one before. You literally take better pictures. It sees better. It's the device sees the world better. It would be, and the display usually goes with that, with the exception that I think there's been some switch offs between OLED and non-OLED, hasn't there, David? You would know that better than me because you're obsessed with OLED displays on phones.
Sorry, ask that question again. There was a brief interruption in your connection.
Yeah, so the displays on iPhones have always gotten better every generation as well, with the exception of a couple like step backward type things, arguably. Like the dynamic island is really cool in new iPhone, but you could still argue that's a step backward on some respects because of the way it cuts out things. And then I was asking about OLED. Wasn't there OLED supported in some iPhones, but not in others?
Yeah, OLED arrived in the iPhone 10, and then they had the kind of base iPhone 11 use LCD, but it's really just that they've changed their naming there, where the base iPhone became the iPhone Pro, and they kind of introduced an iPhone in below that. But no, in general, Apple's displays have improved across the same equivalent tier of product throughout the entire time of iPhone, and I would expect that the non-Pro Vision will probably be similar in display as today's Vision Pro, but arriving 3 years later at a much lower price. I think what Apple is saying with Vision Pro and in calling this first one Pro and pricing it like this is the minimum standard. I don't think we're going to see them release something that's inferior at all. No, but within 3 years, technology will improve. And according to this report, the scale of production of micro displays will increase such that the prices will come down. Because right now, the micro displays used in this headset are estimated to cost more than an entire Quest 3. You know, those two micro displays together. So this is using higher resolution micro displays like this is an extraordinary cost at this stage. But Apple is saying we don't want to do anything lower. And according to this report, there had been some people in Apple who suggested using other display types like LCD with mini LED, which is what you see in Quest Pro, but that is being quickly shot down. And Apple is saying this is the minimum standard.
Yeah, so I'm remembering, what was it? Was it Plessy, the company that Meta partnered with to buy all of the output of a certain display type? Was that correct?
Yeah, that's microLED, which is the technology that will come after OLED and LCD. To be clear, this is micro OLED, OLED micro displays. MicroLED is not something that any company has been able to actually produce, even at this scale yet. It's still far off for any kind of devices. You can buy micro LED TVs, but they are something like $50 to $100,000, and it's arguably that they're not even actually micro at that point because the LEDs are so large relative to the size of these 100-inch displays.
Mm. Yeah, so it's I always want to strike this balance with our show of jumping back and forth between this like technical jargony level of like getting into actually what's going on at the hardware level, and then going back to this upper layer where we talk about what the effects are in the industry and make sure people can really access why this matters, right? Um, Apple has a long history of suppliers kind of choke holding them, um, and trying to get their money's worth out of the iPhone, right? The iPhone is an extraordinarily successful product. Shouldn't the suppliers get their money's worth out of that? So Apple typically dual supplies a lot of their key components to try to make sure that they're not hooked or reliant on any specific other company. And we've got other companies out there, companies like Samsung. that are absolute behemoths, kings of their industry. And we will be talking about another one of the giants of the industry as we move into this last subject of our story today, where Apple has been controlling more and more and more of their tech stack. And there are companies, like we just discussed, making investments 3 to 5 to even 10 years out in technologies that will hopefully pay off in a future product line. I loved your lead into this saying you think the Vision Pro is like the minimum standard, but I'm really questioning, given what I've seen in the evolution of 5 years or 10 years of Meta headsets, right? We haven't improved field of view significantly in like a decade, right? We were still on the same standard 110 degree field of view that we've had for a decade now. And everything else around the VR headset has gotten better, including resolution and the crispness of the lenses. But like I I don't want to step backward on the next gen product. And if Apple can't like source displays to deliver enough of them at the right price, like I guess where I'm going with this is I think the path down from 3,500 to 15 or 1,000 is probably going to be hard, right? Like I can't imagine it being easy to get there.
Yeah, you'd have to wonder what are they going to cut. I think from what we've seen reported and from my own speculation, I think some of the things you can imagine is firstly using a single iPhone tier processor instead of having a MacBook processor with a custom R1 chip. So instead of an M2 and an R1, this thing could have an A18 or A19 or whatever the A series iPhone chips are up to then, because they'd still be able to deliver equivalent performance to what the original Vision Pro's M2 is, just based on the natural progression of those chips. Then we'll probably see some sort of simpler eyesight display, although it's questionable whether Apple. Some people have questioned whether Apple could take that out entirely. I think they're going to want to keep that. I think that's the kind of the distinguisher for this. But the other one is like once you get OLED micro displays from this niche thing that nobody's actually mass produced to something that is being mass produced by 5 or 10 companies and is actually being done at scale, the cost will dramatically drop. The problem is that before these new wave of headsets, the only use from OLED micro displays were incredibly niche. Things like high-end camera viewfinders, like a $5,000 DSLR, the viewfinder would often be using an OLED micro display. There just hasn't been the demand yet. And I think why you're seeing these companies scramble to build up this demand with these Chinese suppliers, and why you're seeing LG and Samsung start to do it too, we'll talk about those soon, but Samsung acquired Imagine earlier this year to start building up an OLED micro display. It's just a matter of time before these supply chains exist. And Apple is obviously, the king of supply chains when it comes to their products. Tim Cook was, let's remember, Steve Jobs' supply chain guy. Before he was promoted to CEO, not many people expected he would be the CEO because that was his specialty. It was getting all these suppliers together, getting enough components at the right prices to make the miracle of launching a new, better and a bigger device every year actually work out. And so Tim Cook is obviously going to be very, very focused on what is really the magic gold for headsets, because you can't build headsets that are this small without OLED micro displays. The reason that Big Screen Beyond is its size is OLED micro displays. The reason that Quest Pro is a good 200 or 300 grams heavier and thicker and more bulky than this thing is that it doesn't have OLED micro displays. They are essential for the future of VR headsets, and all of these companies are going to be focused on it.
Yeah, so going back to my broader sort of questions thinking and trying to bring people further along on where this might go, right? You've got Apple, a company with an extraordinary cash hoard, like just a limitless supply of money. I what is it? Cash on hand, $62 billion is how much Apple has to spend, just literally just laying around. Not to mention, what they could generate after a couple quarters of just selling the devices that they've already got in the product pipeline, right? They could buy any company on the planet that they want or are legally allowed to acquire. And we've this is where I'm going with this, David. We've been building towards this for years, but like it's taken Apple to actually enter the market for like a domino to fall. It would wake up a lot of players that are just not ready to do things themselves and want other companies to make the research investment or to enter the product first and take that cost cut because they can't actually pay for all of that research themselves. So um is Apple I saw a great comment here that maybe we should be thinking about the Vision Pro's pricing as being similar to Mac. Maybe we won't ever see something below 1,000. And that's really hard for me to square with the Quest being 300 to 500 every generation.
Oh, I think I agree with that. I do think that not only on pricing, but in terms of philosophy, this headset should be compared more to the Mac than the iPhone. There's no reason to think that this is trying to take the same kind of market as an iPhone. It is much, much, much similar to maybe iPads and MacBooks. And yeah, I find it also difficult to believe that we would ever get down to below $1,000. But right now, this supply chain issue isn't one that can even be fixed by just throwing money at it. It's going to just take time to open this up and get all this production scale built up.
So sorry, yeah, the money. So I totally get that. That's one element of this. So he's talking about the real hard. What you're doing is you're putting X number of displays out of a manufacturing plant, and a certain number of them are defective and they don't meet your quality standards. And you now need to ship products with the remaining working displays. And you can only make so many and get them out, and then the price goes up. When you get up to tens, hundreds of millions of devices, then you've got enormously cheaper things to work with. And yeah, it makes a lot of sense. But what I'm getting at there is like Apple is going to hit a market that Meta is already 5 years into at least. If you start it from like the Quest birthing time, right? If you consider everything before that dead, even though the Rift is an amazing product and actually had an enormous install base, uh, like you could leave those users behind in the pursuit of millions more and still like not break a sweat in pursuit of a mass market control of everyone. What do you as Apple buy to catch up to tens of millions of installed Quest users?
I don't think Apple wants to do that in the meantime, and I don't think it's what Apple wants to do in general. Steve Jobs had this famous quote when he was asked about why were Windows laptops outselling Macs and why weren't they trying to go after market share, which was, we don't sell junk. And that was a very kind of harsh way of him saying, from a business perspective, that they make money on the hardware margins. Meta is making either no or negative money on each Quest 2 and Quest 3 sold. Apple wants to build a hardware business where they would rather make more profit from fewer people than make less profit by getting a massive hardware install base. You already have companies out there selling more units than iPhones. Globally, Xiaomi, etc., and all of these low-cost Samsung phones are selling more units. But what's interesting is that when you look at which customers actually spend money on store content and which customers actually engage in web e-commerce and things like that, it's actually the iPhone users. Each iPhone user, from a business perspective, is much, much, much more valuable than all of these low-cost Android devices that are sold out there. So I just don't think Apple cares to go for market share, and I don't think for the foreseeable future it's possible for them to build the kind of experience they want at prices that are going to approach anything like a Quest 3. But if you do have the Apple quality in a, say, $1,200 Apple Vision, that's very optimistic, but say there was within the next 5 to 10 years a $1,200 version, that's going to be something that a lot of people go for, because you do see that MacBook Air that's sold around that price selling just as well as Windows laptops that are a quarter of the price. And if Apple can kind of deliver on, as a commenter here said, deliver on that kind of remarkable pitch that they gave at WWDC of a software approach that is just light years beyond what Meta has in any of its headsets, they are going to be able to deliver value enough to actually bring in that product. But I think it was very interesting what you said about this idea of Apple legitimizing the industry in general and bringing up kind of a lot of sleeping giants, because that's very true. There are two moments in this industry that had everyone outside it look up and care. The first was when Facebook acquired Oculus for $2 to $3 billion, and the second was when Apple announced this headset. And as we'll talk about now, there are a bunch of companies that were tepid that will now be wanting to jump in and join this market.
Yeah, so Iron Meds in our comments sort of painting this vision, and it's something I've been thinking about too, that I don't want to, I guess I'm not, Kyle's not on the show. If Kyle's out there in the comments, go ahead and uh, go off in the comments. I had an argument with him on some podcast here about a killer app and that terminology here. And I really think the fact that your other computing devices are locked out of your VR experience is number one, a huge problem for VR just in general. But if you think about the devices with you all the time, the phone, or in some cases the watch for some people, um, these devices, if they're in VR with you, tracked one to one with you always, and they're completely accessible, my phone is sitting on this table right in front of me, and I can only see it if I look past the HMD. Apple can turn that on really quickly on their ecosystem. And you will pick this device up in your hand and be using it in your virtual space as if you, you know, I don't think people are prepared for how much it will enhance immersion for that interaction to just work right, right? To just be able to interact with your existing phone. And yeah, Iron Meds is in our comments outlining this vision of imagine you're driving in your car simulator and you get a call and you reach up on the dash of your virtual car and you pick up the tracked phone and take your call while driving a virtual car. It seems like a dream, and it has been promised in multiple generations of hardware. The Vive, the original Vive, had some of that functionality. I saw someone saying Gear VR was able to do some of these things. I don't even remember. I don't think I had phone service turned on, so I never got to test out any of that at any time. Um, how far are we from Apple actually turning that feature on and how far are we from having anyone else be able to match it?
I think that's something Apple can do as soon as they want to. It's just a matter of, they're going to focus on a core set of features for the first launch. But as we know, Apple continuously every year releases a new software update for all of these families of devices, adding features like this. I imagine we will get this kind of integration within the first 3 years, if it's not there within the first 6 months of launch. And the great thing about Apple's software approach with this shared space of everything being rendered through their own engine and in a way kind of restricting what developers can do is developers don't need to implement it. If Apple can go ahead and do this on day zero of wanting to without having to wait for release an API and have every other developer update. If Meta wants to do what you're describing, have a tracked phone in every device, they need to release a Unity integration and an Unreal integration and ship it out there and watch 5 developers in the entire store bother to adopt it, and no one else will. They can do a crude overlay otherwise, where it'll appear rendered over everything else and hurt your eyes when you're trying to look at another object nearby. But there's nothing else they can do there. In mixed reality, that's different, because as long as the pass-through is good enough, you have your phone by default. There's no tracking needed. And we actually saw Bloomberg's Mark Gurman claim in his reported hands-on with Quest 3 that he could use his phone. He said he was using his phone in Quest 3 in mixed reality. The problem is that when you bring that into virtual reality, it's no longer a hardware problem. It's a software architecture problem. And it kind of comes back to that interoperability thing we're talking about, where fundamentally these are all separately siloed, compiled applications built in a game engine that uses APIs to bring in, I would point out that there already is a tracked object API in Unity for Meta. Right now it's done for keyboards. So if you bring in on any of those Logitech keyboards that can be tracked in home, any Unity application can actually implement to bring that in as a tracked object. Meta could again extend that, but how many applications support that? Plug in your tracked keyboard on Quest and go into applications. I would struggle. Can't even think of a single application that supports it. One of the issues is obviously that just developers aren't going to prioritize things that can only be done on one headset. They're not going to prioritize things that don't focus around their core use case. They may be using a Unity version or integration that's too old to support it. In many cases, Meta's documentation is pretty terrible, so a lot of them may not even know the best way to do it. Often the performance is terrible. And their newly released virtual keyboard, for example, I tried to build it into this application and it tanked the frame rate to about 20 frames per second. So we built our own keyboard instead. Meta has a massive software mess that they need to sort out if they want to deliver the kind of it just works that Apple's software architecture promises to.
So Iron Med's saying, yeah, Gear VR, I could read my text, but if someone called me, my screen went blank while in Gear VR. I love that story because I didn't. It sounds true, right? I didn't actually experience that, or I don't remember experiencing that myself. But that sounds like how it would function. In based on based on the description, you can imagine that internally, at like in the development of multiple phones, right? They've got the what Note 4, 5, 6, I think was the line period of those early Gear VR devices. And you can imagine like the management structure of the teams. And they're like, yeah, we've got this partnership with Oculus and now Facebook, and they're gonna do all the VR for this. And there's the phone team, like, what do we do when a phone call comes in? And the VR team would be like, we'd love to pick that up. And the phone team is like, yeah, but like, what if it's not working? And they must have been a big argument internally at these companies to decide how to implement that feature. And then at the end of the day, you get this awful, awful situation. And over on the Vive side, the experience was always like, yeah, because you're using someone else's platform as the basis of your work, you can't make it a great experience. And ultimately, that is the thing, like Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook has vendetted Meta to be, right? Like they don't want to be beholden to anyone else's platform anymore. They want to control their own destiny. And they got kind of pushed out of phones. But I so I've been messing with it here. The other one that gets me really excited about this, I don't know where David Heaney went. I guess he's rejoining. But we've just spent all this time talking about how Apple could turn this feature on almost immediately, where boom, voila, your phone is here, and you could AirDrop to another person hypothetically, just like we had talked about before. Um, Steam Deck, Steam Deck, and Valve, I could see them pulling this off really easily in their ecosystem. If you've got a Steam Deck on hand, you could easily do a tracked object API, and boom, your Steam Deck is in your hand as a portable kind of command terminal for all of your virtual reality experiences. I want this yesterday. I need this feature. Um, yeah, we desperately need it. Let us know if you've got any comments out there. I'll look through the comments here and see if there's anyone that we should bring up here while we wait for David Heaney to rejoin over here. Um, let's see. Yeah, Grease saying that it's silly. Once your fancy electronic hat goes on, your phone should become nothing more than a hotspot option. Yeah, the other thing I love about the idea that your phone can also be off, right? It doesn't have to have the screen on in order for the touchpad to be active on your device. So you could interact with your device with the virtual screen here while also not revealing anything that's on the screen to anyone around you. So you've got like a private way of interacting with what's on the screen there too, which is pretty cool. Let's see. Yeah, Iron Mez Quest, you can connect to your phone. We never tried it. I did turn on that feature in my Meta Quest app recently to try to sync media, so we'll see if that starts working. Um, as well, Agent M83, there are overlays that do some of these things in PCVR, but they are fragmented rather than unified and still rather hacky to use. That is totally my experience as well. Um, with basically anything on PC, and that's kind of the allure of PC in general, right? Like people want that at the same time that it can be such a nightmare for other people. I'm thinking we will be able to purchase the Vision like a phone with a monthly plan. Yeah, Iron, we've talked about that before. That is an easy thing for Apple to turn to. They have an entire pipeline built out from savings account. You can now get an Apple branded savings account done with a partner, and you can pay from that savings account like to your, you can have your Apple credit account, and then you can get zero zero interest, breaking up, sacrificing your credit limit with Apple, um, and then breaking it up over a monthly plan and pay no interest on it. And it's like it's so close to the company store, uh, but you're still getting actual money like with this whole system. But like there is a whole ecosystem there where you can stay inside Apple Money and pay with Apple Money and get Apple credit, Apple savings, and break up your price over a couple of years. And I keep waiting for Meta to answer some of those things, because when the price is only a couple $100 or a couple, what, $30 or $40 per month, and if you can convince yourself that you're making an investment in your life, like your career, in the same way that like you would make that same argument for the purchase of a car. People make the argument that you purchase a car to go to work. You could make that same argument for a computer, and people have made that same argument for various computers over the years, and that is the place that Apple's going to be putting people in when it comes to Vision Pro. Thank you for coming back, David Heaney. I was getting tired of talking.
That was so. I had something very strange happen there. A warning I've never seen on my Quest 2 before. The the headset started emitting a constant loud beeping at full volume, and a message came up saying that it was so warm that I needed to take it off immediately to avoid injury. So that's how warm it is. Again, I have to stress, like I did at the
Holy
start of this
shit.
show, to
All
Americans,
right, so
there is no air conditioning in the UK, and it is extremely warm. I am on a sixth floor apartment that is very well insulated with a pretty terrible fan, although it is at full speed. The UK was not built for heat like this. Climate change is increasing the temperature, the normal temperature of this climate. I'm going to get a bigger fan for next week. I have never seen that notification on my Quest. I didn't even know it existed. It was not the normal overheating warning that I have seen before. It was take it off or you will be injured level overheating,
Oh
and the
my
headset
God. So
emitting constant loud beeping.
I'm remembering my face to face with Michael Abrash, where he's talking about the various systems we'll have. We'll have AR glasses for outside. We'll have VR glasses for inside when we want to interact with all of our indoor stuff. And I was like, what about air conditioners? And like if we have hundreds of millions of people using these glasses and turning down their air conditioners because this thing is producing so much uncomfortable heat right next to their head, isn't there like going to be a follow-on effect? I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that was miserable, but I'm glad you're still with us. I would hate for the battery to explode on your face. That would be bad.
Kid Godin, developer of Virtual Desktop, saying that if we hear a pop, we'll know what happened to the SoC in my Quest 2. Yeah,
Oh my God.
I'm not going to even touch that thing for a while. To be fair, I was using it all
it
show.
would be
It
the
was
most
getting low.
famous moment in VR history. I mean, right? I mean, you would go down in history at least.
Yeah, I think it's because I plugged it in to charge it while it was already overheating. So somehow I must have hit some terrible limit. Yeah. That's Greasemaster's pointing out that if you have a battery puck, that removes the thermal source from your head. Yeah, although I don't know if I'd want that burning in my pocket at that temperature, and I feel like the pocket wouldn't be very conducive to cooling either. I guess this is one of the advantages of PC VR headsets, which is you don't have to have a battery at all if you have a purely wired PC VR headset. But yeah, so I'm on my Quest Pro now. You may notice the face tracking.
Wait, I can see you. If I wait, smile. Okay. All right. Whatever. He's not going to smile when I tell him to. Whatever.
I know. I did
showed...
smile. I think it's possible the face tracking isn't working because again, this is a really bad room for this. The sun is glaring so much that I had to use the controllers on Quest 2 because it just wouldn't track my hands. The sun was so intense that it was completely drowning out the hand tracking. So yeah, obviously if I put a cover up, then the room just heated up too much. I may have to use a different room in the UK summers from now on.
You've been denying. You saw. I gave you permission to see my facial expressions. You didn't show me the same courtesy. So I enjoy this moment. Thank you for letting me Good to see you. Don't turn that off. All right, let's talk about Meta's reported partnership with LG for the 2025 Quest Pro successor. I can't take credit for this. David Heaney did go on the record with an editorial suggesting that Meta should try again after the Quest Pro's failure. Do you think you had an impact on anyone at Meta deciding to change course and try again?
No, I'm not that hubristic. I don't think these
Okay.
kind of projects would have lasted a lot longer than that. And, as I point out in our article covering this, the first indication that Meta was in talks with LG was a report in November last year from a South Korean news outlet, SBS Biz. So that was just after the release of the first Quest Pro. And they had reported that Meta was in talks with LG Display with the aim of securing micro displays for its future headsets. So just like we were talking about OLED micro displays in Apple Vision, Meta will want it for its future headsets as well, because those OLED micro displays will just allow for much higher resolution and smaller headsets than any of the traditional LCD or traditional OLEDs that are used. So the report this week comes from another South Korean news outlet. Again, LG is a company from South Korea, so you tend to see these business magazines here the first news of any kind of major LG projects. Same thing happens with Samsung. So this other Korean news outlet has said that this partnership or these talks have now evolved into a much wider partnership with the entire LG group, where LG will reportedly be the manufacturer of future Quest Pro headsets rather than Meta doing it in house and using a Chinese supply contractor as a manufacturing contractor. So that will reportedly involve LG Electronics handling mass production using LG display micro displays, LG energy batteries, and LG Innotek components. And the first product from this will reportedly launch in 2025 for around $2,000. So this would not be the first time that Meta has worked with an existing consumer electronics hardware company on a headset. The Oculus Go was manufactured by Xiaomi, and that was done because Xiaomi is an expert at producing things at the lowest possible cost, and they wanted to hit $200. They used Lenovo to manufacture and co-design the Rift S, reportedly because they had canceled the Rift 2 and wanted to very quickly get a product out to market. What these companies that are closer to the supply chains in Asia are great at is getting to market faster than these American tech companies can do in-house. So Google, when they had their Google's Pixel line, they actually bought a lot of HTC's smartphone division to bring that supply chain expertise in. You see companies working, Valve, for example, they worked with HTC to get a product to market with the HTC Vive to compete with the Rift much faster than they had gone in-house. We can see with Steam Deck and Deckard that it takes a lot longer for these companies. There are cultural reasons for that. There's geographical reasons just because they're so much further from the supply chain. But the proof of the pudding is that these companies are experts in hardware. LG, Samsung, the likes of these companies can just get better hardware out faster at a lower cost. But the problem is that if you're working with someone, they have to add their own margin. You can't then kind of sell at cost because these hardware companies make money through hardware. That was one of the reasons the HTC Vive was more expensive than when the Rift was cut. One of the reasons. That's also why the kind of Steam Machines approach failed, because the hardware companies had to add their own profit on top. But that doesn't matter so much for a high-end product like Quest Pro. Meta is wanting to obviously do Quest 3 in-house. It likely will continue that for Quest 4. But for this higher end line, at $2,000, LG can make a margin there and people will pay it because it's a higher segmented price where the product is about the performance and the specs that it brings, not just about kind of getting it out there as cheaply as possible, like the mainline Quest. So this is a kind of very fascinating partnership. It may be that, this is LG's way in to the VR market. It's saying, why would we build up the software expertise from scratch when we can get kind of the distribution and the platform and the store and the content all from Meta, and then we're still having all of our kind of subsidiaries make money off this. LG Display makes money, LG Energy makes money, Innotek makes money, and electronics. We're seeing Samsung take a different approach with Google, reportedly. Well, actually announced, where Google will provide the software and Samsung will sell the product their way. But either Samsung may have asked for an exclusivity period that have had pushed LG over to Meta, or LG might just not have the confidence in Google's software given what's happened with Stadia and Daydream before it.
Yeah, a lot to take in there, a lot of going on, and I loved your overlay of the kind of benefits and how this rolls out. I did try the LG Steam VR headset way back in the day at Steam, the one or second time they showed it, right? They did not show that prototype much. The fabled kind of Steam VR headset from a second manufacturer never materialized, and then we had the Index obviously materialize as the next generation of kind of Valve's investment in their own ecosystem. I'm gonna throw it out there to our audience, just because I think now is a good time to sort of think about it, given that kind of history there. What do you think the likelihood is, if you had to put a percentage on it, um, that at the moment that Mark Zuckerberg walks out on stage at MetaConnect, Valve makes some kind of VR-related announcement of some kind?
I wouldn't put a percentage on it, but if they were going to tease their headset, and I do mean tease, not announce, that would be the time. We saw the same thing kind of happen with Index, where it was teased a bit before it was actually properly announced. If Deckard is what a lot of people think it is, it's going to also need OLED microdisplays, and I just don't think that as we were talking about, as I was harping on again and again, the production supply chain for OLED microdisplays isn't quite there for it to ship in the next few months. But I think it's very possible we see Valve just tease something, literally just even a silhouette of a headset, and say it's coming or something like that, just to put that out there that maybe you shouldn't buy the Quest 3 because something else is going to come along, even though we expect that based on what's been discovered about Deckard so far, it's probably going to be priced quite a bit higher than Quest 3. It doesn't seem like they're going to take the low-cost approach. It'll be more likely to compete with something like the Quest Pro 2 and Apple Vision Pro and the likes of what Samsung's working on. You know, we're starting to see a completely new market segment emerge here of these high-end standalone headsets that will start with Apple Vision Pro, where the prices will be in thousands, not in hundreds. And in many ways, it may start to be a kind of, well, it uses similar software, quite a divergence there where you have Meta and ByteDance maybe competing in the low end, and everyone else kind of competing in the high end. So it'll be fascinating to see how that actually plays out.
Yeah, if I recall, wasn't Steam for iPhone released basically for the iPhone, and then it disappeared without the store button on it, and then it came back. Basically, you can now have the Steam app, but you can't buy games via the Steam app on the iPhone. Is that the way it
I
functions
use
right now?
Android, so I'm not sure. I
Yeah,
wouldn't know that.
I don't. Well, dude, is that a feature? Have you done that? Have you bought a Steam game on the Steam app for Android?
Yes, that is something
Okay.
you can fully do. The app, Google doesn't have those same no store within store restrictions that Apple has, so developers are free to build a lot more openly on Android.
Mm. Yeah, that begins the beginning of like the how I wonder about whether these companies will cooperate, right? Like, uh, you think of a moment like that, what does it do to a company? Like, does Valve get mad and not do business with Apple? No, they still do business with Apple. They go and make the changes that are requested of them because there's money to be made and customers to be made happy by making that product available. But we're moving to this new phase where what is to be gained by a cooperation agreement between Valve and Apple? What's to be gained by cooperation between Meta? We have Microsoft and Meta. It came back, I think. Yeah, excellent. Your new indicator worked. Good job. Yeah, no. What's to be gained by more cooperation is what I keep thinking about going forward. And I would love a Steam Deck that was tracked by an Apple Vision Pro, the same way that the iPhone is tracked by the Apple Vision Pro. I would love Nintendo Switches tracked by the Apple Vision Pro. These are the types of partnerships that I think Meta should be thinking about, frankly, as well.
Well, I mean, I don't see why you would need those things to be tracked if you're in augmented reality. If the pass-through is good enough, you can just play these devices. But Apple would argue that the way they want you to, why would you be wearing the Vision Pro if you're playing on a Steam Deck or Switch? Apple would argue that it wants you to play its Apple Arcade and App Store games using a Bluetooth gamepad on a giant virtual screen. You know, they showed that kind of use case of these apps that are on iPad, which have, you know, pretty equivalent graphics to Nintendo Switch, for example, because those chips and those new iPads are just so impressive. I just don't see like the advantage in a partnership between Apple and Valve at this point. Apple wants to push its own platform. Valve wants to push his. It's the thing is that this is all about the platform at the end of the day. The hardware is a conduit to these companies' platforms where they make the real money. The Steam Deck, for example, is not being sold because Valve wants to be a hardware company. It's sold because they want people to buy more games on Steam. And one of the ways you do that is that you make it available in more form factors. And now you have Steam on the train and in a hotel and on holiday and in bed rather than just for most people, you know, on their desktop computer. We are seeing partnerships drawn up, though. You know, we're seeing Google and Samsung partner for a headset. We're seeing reportedly Meta and LG and Meta and Microsoft on the software front when it comes to services. Microsoft is reportedly, you know, that's its new kind of approach here to just do what it's been doing for years now with Android and iPhone, where it's providing services to companies, but through Meta as well. Microsoft's kind of given up any pretense, reportedly, of actually being one of the major players in this next wave because they can still make an enormous amount of money by providing what people actually interact with, which is the software. And yeah, I think like Valve is not the kind of company that needs to make a partnership here because real advantage would that have to Valve if they can release a headset that runs at least some Steam VR content, or at the very least natively lets you play Steam games like a Steam Deck, and then you can connect it to your gaming PC. You're using Steam hardware for Steam software and Steam content. There's no why would they cut any other company in?
Yep. It's the exact same advantage that I kind of outlined, I think, while you were gone, where you can have your iPhone screen, you can have your iPhone in your hand in an Apple Vision Pro, hypothetically, and the screen can be off to all viewers. So you've essentially given yourself private viewing glasses for your iPhone screen, hypothetically. The same thing could be
So
applicable to a Steam Deck.
I think Apple would see that as a failure of their software. I think they would see you using, at the end of the day, why would you be seeing a little tiny 2D rectangle in your hand? Because that's what you get without Vision Pro. What Apple will pitch is that they will let you use all of those same apps with iCloud syncing all of the content across on different devices in a giant screen where you can have 5 of them around you and place them wherever you want. In the same way that today you can do this between Mac and iPhone and iPad. The pitch won't be use your iPhone in augmented reality. It will be use your apps in augmented reality. And that's actually what they said when they were introducing it. Said your favorite apps now in spatial computing. That's the pitch. To me, why not just take the headset off at that point if you're just using your phone anyway? What a headset that you're spending $3,500 on can do is so much more than that, and it's bringing these apps together in a real world space around you.
Sure, I think I agree with that on some levels. It's more I want both modes, right? I don't want to have to take the headset off to interact with my phone. If I have all my apps working one to one, yeah, I get that, but like,
But you don't want to interact with
that's a
your phone. You
long
want to
path.
interact with your apps.
Yeah. I don't know. We'll have to see how it comes together, I guess, over time. We've had a very active comment section today. I saw people arguing about field of view and foveated rendering for much of the stream today. Appreciate you fixing the audio. Sorry about that. Should have that better in hand next week. Um, Anything you want to get into before I close out here? I won't be able to do my camera test today because we switched streaming. I suppose you could switch it back, but I don't want to bother. But we've got a big month, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that before we closed out. So do you have any final comments here?
No, I was just looking through the comments here. As you say, very active comment section, a lot to read there. Someone saying that they can buy Steam games in their iPhone app. I think what that was referring to was using the Steam Link app to go to access your PC. You couldn't then purchase apps because then you were actually playing them on your iPhone. It's not that you can't purchase things in iPhone apps. You can purchase things on Amazon, for example. It's you can't purchase things that can be played on your iPhone. It was the Steam Link app there.
I think that makes sense. Okay, and there was
This,
that applies to the distinction for Amazon, right? Since I can't buy Kindle
yeah,
content
it's
unless
the
I go to the
same thing
browser.
with Xbox streaming, how they couldn't bring Xbox streaming to iPhone, they had to go through the browser. Apple considers anything that remotely, if you can pay for a piece of content that you can use on your iPhone, you have to go through Apple's system to, and that's one of the things that EU regulators are looking pretty heavily at. And I think even US competition regulators are starting to look at that and say, is this really how we want the future to be? If there only are two choices, Android and iPhone, should those two companies be the digital gatekeepers forever? And that opens up to much bigger questions than we're discussing now.
So, Super Heavy Metal Demon asking here, is Quest Lite 6 off? They've made no official comment on that specific hardware, but UploadVR has in the past pushed Meta on that very specific question of whether they would ever release a headset without 6 again, and they said no. They told UploadVR very specifically that is, like, comment, subscribe to our work. That is one of the questions we very specifically asked, and they very specifically said to us they are all in on 6 going forward, right?
Yeah, they said they'll never release a 3 degree of freedom headset again. They will never release a headset without position tracking. I think it would be, other than like very specific business use cases in museums and things or education, I think it would be unthinkable to release a consumer headset without positional tracking these days. It would just be unthinkable.
Yeah, and so in our comments, people are pushing back on that commenter saying, "What do you know about Quest Lite?" Because that is just a rumored thing. And to recap, what we've reported, what is known, is there has been a roadmap. So we started off this discussion talking about Quest Pro 2. Now we're talking about potentially the next headset from Meta, which would be a like an even cheaper, less expensive than Quest um, 3 device to sit somewhere underneath it in place of where Quest 2 is. So we have heard reporting and trusted reporting from people who have been reliable in the past that there was a roadmap at some point that included a device that fit that description planned for next year. But the thing we have to remember about Meta is they they change their plans all the time. Every 6 months or so, even less than that, they are messing around teams, changing their plans, and coming up with a new idea. And previous reporting was, they pushed out their next Quest Pro and pushed it way out into the future. And now we've got new reporting suggesting that maybe we've got a new Quest Pro 2 that's going to be coming in. These things can change any time for any number of reasons. But right now, indications are that we've got a less expensive device coming next year, right?
Yeah, and we actually should talk about the fact that this same report that talked about the LG partnership for Quest Pro 2, that same South Korean outlet mentioned that they believe that this headset, this Quest Lite, as some people are speculating it could be called, will actually come in at less than $200. And we mentioned this in our article about this and said that this seems very difficult to believe. It is very difficult to believe that they're going to ship a full function headset for less than Oculus Go, for less than the 3-year-old Quest 2. Like where exactly, how is this possible? I cannot personally believe that that is a thing. The only way that I could square that happening is perhaps there's a chipset line from Qualcomm that we're all forgetting about. We always talk about, would this next headset use XR2 Gen 1 from Quest 2 or XR2 Gen 2 from Quest 3? But what if it uses XR1 Gen 2? What if Qualcomm specifically builds a cheaper chipset for cheaper headsets that, because of the passage of time, 3 years since the release of the chip in Quest 2, is somewhere between the XR2 Gen 1 and Gen 2 in performance, while being a lot lower cost. Because, on smartphones, Qualcomm has their 8 series that's used in the high-end phones, and it has the 6 series and the 7 series and the 4 series. Maybe that's how this happens.
Yeah, so now we've got a different mic situation. I think it's maybe back to your Quest Pro mic.
Yeah.
You wear
To
the
be clear,
Quest Pro. Yeah, go ahead.
the reason I don't use Quest Pro is because of this issue. But as anyone who was listening earlier happened, my Quest 2 essentially exploded. So this is the only option. I really apologize for this. I do have a wind guard that I attached to it.
It did not. It did not explode, but it did. It warned him it might. Is I guess the way we'll.
Joke. That was a joke.
No, it was a joke, but it's still. It was funny. I wanted to recap people that might have missed the situation where David Heen disappeared from existence. And then reappeared 5 minutes later and told us that he had a near-death experience. That's what happened. I just wanted to recap for anyone that came in blind. Yeah,
it sounded like a smoke alarm. It was a full volume, loud beeping on the speaker until I took the headset off.
Yeah, go back in the show. We'll go see if there's like a heat map that they give us for watch time, and it's the moment David Heaney came back from his near-death experience when everyone started tuning in. I've completely lost what we were talking about. Yeah, I can't remember. We were closing out, but we were talking about some interesting things. We've got some interesting comments.
We were just talking about that Quest Lite, and I was saying it might use XR1 Gen 1. Yeah, it might just be a headset where everything is designed to be as cheap as physically possible. A single plastic mold, fixed lenses, maybe really bad speakers or no speakers. Maybe you have to use your audio. We know that Meta is always tempted to try and release just the cheapest thing they can possibly think of, and we'll have to see how this turns out, because you got to imagine that Quest 3 seems like, to me, the minimum standard for the future. I don't think any company should really want to release something worse than Quest 3, but clearly, reportedly, Meta may want to.
Yeah, and people are still talking about the heat warning thing. And it's funny to me that we've got also on staff Harry Baker, based in Australia, so in the Southern Hemisphere, where obviously weather is very different this time of year. Yeah, the $200 Quest is endlessly fascinating to me, and it makes, when you talk about what could they take out, and you get hung up on like, what would it take, right? What I always have to balance that in my head with, what does Andrew Bosworth want, right? He's the CTO of Meta, and he dropped into that position kind of after building up over years as head of VR and AR. And we had the Quest Pro hit and kind of make a dud, right? Like it feels like it did not do what it was meant to do. And we don't know how these decisions get made, but I did go face to face with Mark Zuckerberg and Andrew Bosworth, and it seemed like Mark Zuckerberg personally made some decisions around the Quest Pro's design. And you got to wonder if, when you're coming up on the next design after that, the Quest Pro 2, or in this case, what we're talking about is like a Quest 3 Lite or a Quest 2 that's slightly better, or maybe way better, but also much cheaper. You got to think that there's probably discussions going back and forth between Andrew Bosworth and Mark Zuckerberg. And it's like, you were kind of wrong with the Quest Pro's balance of decision making. Let's try something different. Now I'm making some of this up, right? I have no idea how these discussions go between these people, but I have to think that there's some element of like, let me get my chance on a design. And I have to think that a Quest, I have to think that like, you get you get some of the benefits of a Quest 3 in a $200 device, and you do have a significantly larger market. I think Meta learned a really frustrating lesson in the idea that they priced this thing at $1,500, couldn't sell enough of them, put it at $1,000, and it's still not probably enough. now they're going to go the other way and try to cut everything. And yeah, I could see them going, what? Let's say 2 cameras instead of 4, and let's say an XR2 chip that's on the Quest Pro class of chip, but not as expensive as 3. If it had those 2 things, do you see it getting to $200?
I still no. I still just don't see how you three. If you said $300, I'd say yes.
All
But
right.
considering that we expect this thing to come with controllers, at 200, it just seems absurd to me. To be clear, the only reason we think that is because a former Meta employee on Twitter said that they worked on the controllers for this Quest Lite headset. Again, to be crystal clear, Quest Lite is a speculative name. Maybe that person was wrong, or maybe they worked on an earlier version. I could see them getting it without controllers, but I just can't see how can it be cheaper than Quest 2. Think about it. Quest 2 is $300, and it's already a very cheaply built device. It's just Fresnel lenses, a by today's standards low resolution single LCD panel, some basic controllers with IR LEDs, and 4 fisheye gray scale cameras.
Sure. All right, so we've talked about the technical aspect of this, and I led with that, but there's another element of subsidizing. There's an element, and Andrew Bosworth has actually spoken about this in his AMA sessions over on Instagram, where he suggests that like when you get up enough volume of a device, you actually can lower the price, and there's like a sweet spot. And I have to think he is willing to cut every corner imaginable to achieve the cheaper entry level for his entire platform afterwards. And the only thing, like the thing we haven't come across here is that subsidy, right? Let's like an investment in the future of your platform. So like if he's coming, if I were at Meta and I needed to bet the entire company on the future of my VR headsets, I would lay off an enormous number of employees. I would dramatically reduce my costs, become a shell of a company. And there are arguments to be made that the Twitter reshaping is more the reshaping that maybe should happen at Facebook to get it ready for a change of this magnitude where you're shipping physical hardware to hundreds of millions of people. But you reduce your costs, and then you just sell at a loss that would be eye-watering to any other company in the world. And that's the part of this that is so hard for us to talk about. You say you can't imagine what they would remove from the device. I'm also trying to balance that with saying, like, what wouldn't Mark Zuckerberg and Andrew Bosworth pay to secure and maintain their lead with install base over the next 5 years?
I think that's a good argument, but the only one problem for me there is then why is Quest 3 $500? Why isn't Quest 3 $300 or $400? If they're able to take a few things out of it and bring it down to $200, what makes Quest 3? Because you would then be talking about, if we do, say this does happen as this report suggests, and you have a $200 Quest Lite and a $500 Quest 3, we're not talking about a slight difference here. We're talking about 2.5 times the price. I just don't see where, again, I'm repeating myself over and over, but I just don't see where you get that. The Quest 3, we looked at that unboxing video last week. That's a pretty Spartan device in itself, Like, yes, you have the depth sensor, and yes, you kind of have those color cameras, but other than that, like, it's not really like a fully super duper featured device. It has a very basic head strap. They've taken the rings off the controllers. It already is something that looks to be low cost. So yeah, I don't know. I'm still thinking that this report is not true. I think if there is a Quest Lite, we should expect $300, not $200.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's enough on that for this week. And yeah, there is our inbox shot of the Quest 3, obviously from the very leaky ship of Meta. Yeah. Well, that's our show this week. We've obviously got a crazy couple of weeks coming up. We have been building to it for a very long time. September 27th and 28th, David Heaney and I should be meeting up in real life for the first time in over a year, second time ever. I'll actually get to see his real facial expressions and understand that he what was it? What did I learned last time? That you prefer LED? No, you prefer OLED phones and walk very fast. That's what I learned about him last time. So we'll see what I learned about him this time. So we will be there to find out everything about Quest 3. Come back to UploadVR.com for all your latest. Become a member on our website as we work out covering the next generation of personal computing. It's going to be an intense couple of months, couple of years ahead. We have been getting all our ducks in a row for this for a very long time. Email tips at uploadvr.com, tips at uploadvr.com if you have anything you're interested in us covering. And yeah, we'll see you in the future. Yeah, okay, hold on. Before we close out, I have to get a little bit closer and have a slap fight with you, David. That was asked for in our comments. All right. We fought in virtual reality. It was important that I do that. Thank you. It's nice to be able to see his expressions. Like, I've never had the need to fight David Heaney before in the studio, but now that I can see his facial expressions, if I'm rude to him or mean, it's just a lot more satisfying. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. We'll see you in the future. Thank you so much.
I'm going to go check whether my Quest 2 is on fire or not. So I'll let everyone know next week.
Yeah, you make sure you get a screenshot before it shuts down next time. I want to see a screenshot of that dialogue.
Oh, you couldn't. It was a complete system locking message. Just like, it was just
man.
like, take this headset
the
off.
Rarest. Yeah, there's rare MetaQuest dialogues, and David Heaney just found one of the rarest. Beautiful.